Coming up next, probably the greatest thing ever done on the Bookening, or should I say the Spookening, Howard Phillips Lovecraft's immortal chiller, The Outsider. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Spookening, the scariest podcast of them all. Or should I say, Podghastly, the ghastly effect of horror, as we read the scariest of stories in this special spooktacular horrific week of scariness.
And this is actually Halloween.
This is actually Is this Halloween today?
Yeah, the 31st.
That's right.
Halloween.
Kids will be getting candy with razor blades in it and other such spooky
I feel like the mysterious
things.
Phantom needs to show up.
Does this mysterious Phantom need to show up? He might before all said and done.
Oh, no, I thought he was dead.
You never know. I think he had like a roof fall on him last time or something. I don't know. I really don't remember.
I don't either.
It's not like I was here for it anyway. Brandon, of course, you are the... this is day 4, and we've been going a little insane, but you are the... I'm your humble and obedient ghost, I should say, first of all. And you are the scholar... No, the mauler who's a scholar who's a mauler of bleeding.
Yeah.
That's what you are. Brandon Chast Fiend.
The squalor.
The squalor. Like urban decay. Pretty spooky.
It's real scary.
Yeah, it's scary stuff.
I'm a ghost Brandon, too.
You are also Ghost Brandon, that's right. And speaking of Ghost Brandon, we have his comrade in arms, none other than Beastmaster Funky Town himself. Jake Menskiller, the pastor who's a master of feeding on flesh. Changed it up. What do you think? You like that? You feeling it?
Not really.
Not really? You want to go back to pastor who's a master of bleeding?
Whatever.
I think you've been complaining in this series about kind of the passivity of bleeding, like you're just bleeding out or something. So I wanted to give you something a little bit more diabolical and active and proactive. You're feeding on flesh, like a zombie or a vampire. Do you want that?
Sure.
All right. He's the pastor who's a master of feeding on flesh.
Good.
People like it so much when I say that phrase. Now,
flesh is just such a nice word.
Flesh is a wonderful word.
Flesh.
Yep. Flesh.
Moist flesh.
Oh boy.
His nails on a chalkboard.
That is nails on a chalkboard. All right. No more uses of the word flesh in this story. But and by the way, speaking of flesh, not a lot of flesh on this character.
No, man. He's all bones.
He's all bones.
Dried flesh, maybe.
Yeah, dried.
It's not moist, that's for sure.
No. This is like the most unmoist flesh you could hope to encounter.
But seemed like a nice enough guy.
He did seem like a nice guy. Stuck in that castle.
Yeah.
Underneath a graveyard somewhere.
He was able to kind of write.
He was able to kind of write.
I mean, it's about the quality you would expect from someone who was trapped in a castle for years and
that's absolutely
partly
right.
dead.
And you know who else was partly dead and could barely write? Howard Phillips Lovecraft.
Well, nice transition, Nathan.
A very sickly man and a very bad writer, but very influential. And I'm going to provide context on this one. Brandon, is that okay with you?
That's fine with me, Nathan.
Because I am a fan of weird fiction, and Howard Phillips Lovecraft is the prince of weird fiction. He invented weird fiction. I think he may have coined the term weird fiction. So, Lovecraft, born in 1890, lived until 1937, 47 years young when he died. Now, I'm not going to get into a bunch of stuff about Lovecraft. This is just going to be a quickie. I think we'll actually come back to Lovecraft because this is not the best example of his work. It's not really a representative example of what's good about Lovecraft, or at least what people like about Lovecraft at all. I thought that this one would be a better story for us to do as a standalone because it kind of works as a standalone, whereas a lot of his other stories, you kind of have to get into the whole Lovecraft mythos to understand, but this is a very atypical Lovecraft story. Anyway, who was Lovecraft? He was a misanthropic jerk who lived out his life on a meager inheritance and thought that he could be a writer. That's basically all you need to know about him.
There we go.
He submitted stories to magazines such as Weird Tales, the pulp magazines of the time, which we've talked about, I think, in our Ray Bradbury episodes. Brandon talked to us about pulp magazines. And none of this stuff would be remembered. He had no popularity at his time, except for as a random name that you might come across in a junkie magazine. The only reason he's remembered is because of a couple of disciples of his that thought his stuff was cool. Specifically one who's pretty famous in the weird fiction universe called August Derleth, who took Lovecraft's stuff, synthesized it, republished it. He was basically an acolyte who just made sure that the world, he lived his life to spread Lovecraft stuff because it really meant something to him. So he compiled it, published some book forms. I don't think it was actually collected into a book while Lovecraft was alive. But the thing that you really need to understand about Lovecraft is something that doesn't come across very well in this story, which is his influence, what he actually did. I was reading this article about a German band named Kraftwerk. Have you guys ever heard of Kraftwerk?
Yep.
Brandon?
No.
If it's German, yeah, it's Kraftwerk.
Kraftwerk?
Kraftwerk.
Have you ever heard Kraftwerk?
Maybe.
But you couldn't hum a tune.
No.
So this article was making the case, I think it was in Rolling Stone or something like that, that this is the most influential band far and away since the Beatles, that in fact all music that you listen to today, all popular music that is influenced by Kraftwerk. They invented synthetic beats and they invented synthetic rhythm sections. Some people had used synths before, but they were the people who just out of nowhere said, we can use synthesizers. And now you listen to any pop song, you listen to indie rock, you listen to anything you like, it makes use of synthesizers. These people are basically responsible for hip hop in a lot of ways. Their beats are sampled in hip hop quite a bit. Dr. Dre, people like that have said, we wouldn't be able to do what we do if not for these guys. So they're like the thing that you haven't actually listened to, but they influenced everything. One of those things, kind of like everybody's heard of Elvis, but do they know the blues and rhythm black people that Elvis stole from? Lovecraft is that for horror fiction. The entire 20th century of horror fiction is just riffing on what Lovecraft did. Stephen King, the Alien movies, you name it, it's influenced by Lovecraft. And his devotees think he's pretty cool, but he's really, I think, probably best known to the outsider. Get it?
Got that.
Just as somebody who influenced everybody else.
Cthulhu.
Yeah, he came up with Cthulhu, and Cthulhu is this big squid god that's living under the water, and one day he's going to rise. It's going to be very bad.
He's become something of a symbol for nerd culture, right?
Oh yeah,
Cthulhu?
Absolutely. Well, he's just, I think the internet is one of those, the internet has brought together all the people who thought they were the only person who knew who Lovecraft was, and it turns out that there's a lot of us.
You all crawled out of your castles at the same time, and now you worship at the pyramids together.
Right. Well, so that last part where he's worshiping at the pyramids, that's kind of quintessentially Lovecraft. The idea that there's these dark things that are going on that he can join up with, that's pretty Lovecraft. The idea of a corpse guy living in a graveyard is pretty cheesy, actually, compared to what Lovecraft would usually do, because what he did really well was cosmic deities like Cthulhu. The idea, his innovation was basically the universe doesn't care, and there's a bunch of monsters out there, and they aren't like Dracula or Frankenstein. There's nothing human about them. There's nothing religious about them. They're not perversions of things that come from folklore. Or if they are related to folklore, it's the monsters and the gods and the Greek myths. They're just other. A good example of something that's in the lineage of Lovecraft would actually be that the original Alien movie, right? The astronauts just stumble across a creature, and this creature is more powerful than them, and it simply exists to feed on them. And it's just this other thing. It's just the idea of outside entities. That's his big contribution, and everybody from Stephen King to all the greats, Brandon, they've riffed on it. So that's Lovecraft. And somebody sent us an email asking us to talk about Lovecraft. So
here we go.
We will read, one day we will read The Call of Cthulhu, or maybe At the Mountains of Madness, which are much more in line with everything I've been talking about. This is an early Lovecraft story. It's kind of cheesy. Lovecraft really liked this guy named Lord Dunsany. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of him. He's like a fantasy writer from, I think, the Victorian era. And he was both he and Edgar Allan Poe, who were big influences on Lovecraft, were really verbose arch overwriters. And you can tell that Lovecraft kind of fell in love with that. And he got better as he went on, but this is an early one, and he is really reaching for that ornate style. You know, he probably read The Mask of the Red Death right before he wrote this thing and thought, I'm gonna do you one better, Poe. And so,
boy, was he wasn't reaching, he was running through those fields.
He was running through those fields. Well, Jake, I promised last week that you would read
last week. Wow.
Yesterday
that
you would read the first sentence of this bad boy.
Yes. Unhappy is he to whom the memories of childhood bring only fear and sadness.
We need a little bit more.
Wretched is he who looks back upon lone hours in vast and dismal chambers with brown hangings and maddening rows of antique books, or upon odd or upon odd watches in twilight groves of grotesque, gigantic, and vine-encumbered trees that silently wave twisted branches far aloft. Yeah, that's such a lot the gods gave to me.
Well, you know, all the people,
to me,
all those people,
the
are
dazed, the disappointed, the barren, the broken,
the barren.
And yet I am strangely content and cling desperately to those sere memories when my mind momentarily threatens to reach beyond to the other.
That's fantastic.
Doesn't that just capture the experience of every one of us?
I remember now reading this and thinking about somebody that we used to make fun of. That line in particular, it's amazing.
He lost me at that point because, sure, unhappy childhood. People are wretched if they can look back at it. But as soon as he started saying wretched are those with like the brown papers and all that, I'm like,
and the vines reaching.
Yeah. Wretched is he who looks back upon lone hours in vast and dismal chambers with brown hangings and maddening rows of antique books.
That doesn't sound so bad.
Or upon odd watches in twilight groves of grotesque, gigantic, and vine-encumbered trees that silently wave twisted branches far aloft.
Yeah, there's nothing I hate worse than what? Looking on enchanted groves of vine-encumbered trees that wave. I can't even recreate one of those things for jest. Oh, boy.
Poor guy. All
I
those
know
antique
not
books
where
and
I
trees.
was born.
Well, another big influence of Lovecraft, it was actually Mr. Blackwood, who we'll talk about tomorrow, and I think Blackwood was better. But
yes, Blackwood was better.
But
at least the Willows.
At least the Willows. Yeah. Well, and I've read some of his other stuff, and I think some of it's pretty good. But let's talk about this story, The Outsider.
All right.
So spooky. For people who haven't bothered reading it, we should just tell people what happens in this story. So there's this guy, and he's in this dismal castle thing, right?
Yeah, with
enchanted
dank walls and a stank to the whole place, like corpses,
cobwebs everywhere, and
everywhere you look there, cobwebs, but lots of antique books.
He finds himself, to not really be repulsed by the skeletons and things in the crypts, and he thinks that's weird.
Yeah, well, that's pretty weird.
Yeah, he's not repulsed by them. He finds a lot of time to read. And in his reading, he becomes enchanted by the idea of seeing light because he's never seen light before.
Nope.
The moon and the stars. And so there's this one tower that reaches up, but the stairway runs into the wall. But it keeps going up, and so one day he decides to climb it. And he climbs, and then he bumps his head against the floor.
Now, our listeners are probably really scared, Brandon. I hope it's going to be okay.
Just hang on, readers, our listeners.
I hope it's not.
And so he pushes the stone up a little bit and manages to get into this area that it's like a big chamber. And he runs to a window hoping that he will see what he's been longing to see his whole life, which is light. And he sees the moon. Yeah. And the moon sees me. But he looks out and it's not what he's expecting, though, because he's expecting to see the tops of trees. What he sees instead is the ground. And bum, gravestones.
Oh my.
So he climbs out of his window, goes through this graveyard. He sees
listeners.
He sees a chapel, but then in front of him he also sees a castle. And there's something strangely familiar about this castle. He goes towards it, he sees all these merry revelers.
It's just a story.
climbs through the window, and they all start screaming. And they run and they panic, and people are picking each other up in their panic and getting everybody out of there. And then
he's like, I wonder why they did that.
He's like, he's so scared. He doesn't know if he's going to turn around to look at whatever it might be that scared all of them. And then suddenly he sees it.
Yeah.
And he tries to escape, but then he trips and falls forward, and his hand touches.
I think we should have Jake read us the sentence.
This I have known ever since I stretched out my fingers, the abomination within that great gilded frame. Stretched out my fingers and touched a cold and unyielding surface of polished glass.
No! It was a reflection!
Wow. The gilded arch was a mirror.
Oh, I love it
your
when they
heart
have
out, Rod
spell
Serling.
It out. It's always so fun.
Well, and by the way, Jake read that properly because the thing about the glass is all in italics.
Yeah, polished glass.
No! Listen, in Lovecraft's defense, he wrote this for a pulp magazine. He had no dreams of posterity. I mean, this was like they'll pay me a penny per 2 words or something, which you can definitely tell they were paying per the word the way he wrote this thing. Apparently, it was better than a lot of the other stuff because it's what's the word? What's the phrase? It's
lasted.
It's endured. It's stood the test of time. That's what I was looking for. And people still read this stuff and they like it. Words. And I've read some of the, I've read like old weird tales just to see what it's like. And actually, you can tell when you look at the context that here's a guy who's doing something interesting where a lot of people are just hacks. He was trying and he was being interesting, but he also was just not a good writer at all. At all. He was really bad.
Polished glass.
It's like the kind of thing that we made fun of a couple of times with our narrator on the Ville.
Yeah. Just
a pit into never-ending nightmare.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I don't remember exactly what it was, but something like that. Yeah, just the horrors of it all. Well, what else do you guys want to say about The Outsider?
Unfortunately, I did not read this with my students, so I have no insightful comments to make about whatever this.
And then I have nothing to riff on and pretend like I have something to say.
But it kind of isn't in Saki to show you that Saki is a different class of writer.
Mm-hmm.
At least there was something to say about the Saki story. I mean, what are you going to say about this?
I've been thinking about this since Mask of the Red Death. It is easy to make fun of the overwrought language and everything, and I get it, and I pretended to be more offended at that than I actually was. Or maybe it's also possible that I played up the offense so that you guys wouldn't know how truly offended I was.
That was more of what I was expecting was happening.
But we'll never know. It's ambiguous. It's like the ending of Shredny Vashtar. But here's the thing I was going to say. Horror is about atmospherics, right? It's about setting the stage and making it spooky. And so you can't blame a guy for trying. I'm not going to say that what Lovecraft or Poe did really holds up for today, but they are trying to create a spooky atmosphere.
And when you're writing a short story, a lot of that's striking the right tone.
Yeah.
And that depends on, as much as anything, maybe having a willing audience.
Yeah, and 14-year-old boys that are like me that encounter The Outsider or The Mask of the Red Death, my fear bone was ready to be tickled, and I had one, and I thought it was cool and interesting, and you're like, oh wow, I might walk across a graveyard anytime and not realize that below are whole other worlds of entities living in castles, and I don't know. Fired the old imagination. Uh-huh. And then the thing you can say about The Mask of Red Death, I'm just going to try and mount a genuine defense here. The thing that you can say about both The Mask of the Red Death and this is that they're both supposed to be oppressive, actually. And so all the language that's piled on that feels oppressive and stupid and stilted and stultifying, might we argue that it's, in fact, hitting the mark, guys? That it's doing exactly what it's intended to do? And maybe the author had a little bit more intentionality than we give him credit for and wasn't just being an idiot that liked to pile adjectives on top of each other.
What was that one book that we read by that one guy who was writing in this really immature first-person narrative style? And on the one hand, it'd be like, well, yeah, that would be how a stupid, immature person would write. But On the other hand, I don't think he did it on purpose.
Ready Player One?
Yeah.
I think that was it. I wonder if you couldn't argue, though, that Edgar Allan Poe, at least, had more control over exactly how far over the top he was going than... Certainly, if you read his essays on composition.
So did J.D. Salinger.
Well, I, as we might recall, liked
You defended J.D. Salinger.
Defended J.D. Salinger, too.
I mean, it doesn't make it worth reading.
No.
Yeah, so sure, maybe Edgar Allan Poe liked the sort of weird, musty, purple gloom that resonates throughout his stories, but then it doesn't mean that it's worth it. Even though he has control over it, it doesn't mean that the big Gothic organs and the Phantom of the Opera aura to everything is really anything that anyone should want to participate in. But
if somebody does...
really like Andrew Lloyd Webber.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, guys.
There might be something unhealthy to that.
And they're idiots.
I mean, I'm literally about to... So today in class, Edgar Allan Poe came up, and I said, I really don't like that guy. And then I had a student who really took offense to that. And I said, well, do you want to argue this out? And so tomorrow we're going to be reading a Poe story, and then we're going to fight.
What are you going to read?
I'm not sure yet. What should we read?
The Mask.
Should we read The Mask?
Telltale.
Yeah, Telltale.
Left an impression on all of us.
Yeah.
It's the best way to give
Poe the best chance.
Yeah, to give Poe a chance and to throw a bone to your poor student who you're going to tear to shreds.
I think that's true.
Yeah, because he said, it was sad. He said, you just like winning arguments, don't you?
Well, the thing that I would say about Poe, this is the same argument I made 2 minutes ago, but I'll make it again. Somebody like Ready Player One guy, what's his name? I want to say Ernest Salinger, but that's
Klein.
Not right. Ernest Klein. He is bad. He is trying to do things and failing. I would say we could at least give Poe this. Poe is succeeding at being exactly the Poe that he wants to be. You could say that that's trash.
Well, yeah, if you're doing a
comparison
contrast between Poe and who's this guy?
Salinger.
No, the guy with the ironic. No, this guy with an ironic name.
Lovecraft.
Yeah. Because he doesn't love craft.
Right. Yeah. No. No, he doesn't.
Lovecraft, I think, is more like a Klein in that he wanted to do something, but he just lacked the talent.
Yeah, it's that second sentence that Jake read. It's risible to use a word.
While Poe, that was the aesthetic he was going for.
He achieved precisely the effect he wanted.
Yeah, and it makes me not like Poe, really.
Right, but it's because it's not because you fault his execution, it's because you don't like the thing that he's aiming at.
Yeah, it's because I don't think what he's aiming for is healthy.
And I disagree. I think that in small doses it can be fine. Just like you can watch a Twilight Zone and not, watch an Alfred Hitchcock movie and not become a psycho.
Yeah.
There's a little room for some spooky fun around Halloween time. I think that's what I would say to that.
I mean, we're doing these episodes, aren't we?
We are doing these episodes.
Yeah.
Anything else to say about Lovecraft? I'm sorry. I bet there's at least 4 or 5 Lovecraft fans listening right now. I'm sorry we didn't do your hero justice. I like him too, but I think this one is pretty cheesy. One day I'll get the fellas to I won't get them to but I'll get them to read The Call of Cthulhu or At the Mountains of Madness. And
I want to read a Cthulhu story.
That's probably what we should have done. I don't remember what I was thinking when I decided to do The Outsider.
It's short.
Yeah, it's short.
And we had to do 5 of these.
And Lovecraft is master, and we'd get a lot of interesting, fun context out of it.
Yep.
We already had our long one with the Willows.
We did, which we will talk about tomorrow. And let's get there another day, as young Annie told us. The only way to get to tomorrow, though, is to do a few more donor shout-outs. People will remember we are shouting out the donors over the course of the week. So let's scream out Benny and Dana. Die. Fearbius.
Die!
And let's scream out Scarrick and Cathersin from Yon Window Breaks.
Oh!
And of course, Pro Death, Sore, and Lady X.
Pro Death, Sore, and Lady X.
And of course, Lavender's Scream, Dylan. Ah!
Whoa, that woke me up.
And Noah Constrictor is already scary enough, I guess.
Noah Constrictor's already scary enough, I guess. Ah!
And Scaracheap. Oh! And Natalie with a battery of kung fu disastery.
What Nathan said. Ah!
And the scare and fragrant maiden Scully.
And Mulder.
Oh. I'm sorry, guys.
I choose to believe.
Yeah, he does. He did that, Mulder. Scully, not so much. Guys, I'm sorry. The Halloween puns weren't really tripping off my tongue today. I know our listeners are disappointed, and I feel bad.
It's fine, Nathan.
You can support The Bookening at patreon.com/The Bookening. Now, today is Halloween, so we've either got our $1,000 a month or not, and we will either be marching around the courthouse or not. But either way, you should still get us to $1,000 by next year so that we can make a year out of Tolkien.
Scream!
There we go. Brandon's bringing up the rear. And what better note to go out on than that? Not with a whimper, but a bang.
Yeah.